Hello and welcome back to another BlizzCon 2015 video. This one is again about Legion, and we're going to be talking about raids and dungeons. Many times Blizzard have said the dungeons are going to be a very large part of this expansion, and the big new system of this expansion, surrounding dungeons anyway, is challenge mode dungeons, but don't tune out yet, they will play a very different role and they will be done differently. This video will also cover a quick overview of the dungeon and raid content of the first patch. So then, first of all, challenge modes. The team wanted to keep dungeon content relevant both in terms of rewards and in terms of difficulty throughout the length of the expansion, and they also wanted to find a way to make them feel different from run to run. Their solution to this is basically surrounding an item called the Challenger's Keystone. The keystone will point to a random dungeon, and the keystone will have a level and display a target time for the dungeon in question. According to Ian, this time will correlate roughly with a silver proving ground requirement, so it's not crazy hard. Completing the dungeon ahead of the timer will level up your keystone, and the level of your keystone is proportional to the difficulty of the dungeon. So as time goes on, and you level up your keystone more and more, you will face harder and harder dungeons. The keystone also applies modifiers to the dungeons. For an example, Enrage causes all enemies under 30% HP to do double damage. Other examples of modifiers include enemies' corpses exploding, and another one where everybody takes constant damage all the time. These modifiers are basically intended to change up how you tackle a dungeon from a strategic perspective. Of course, these dungeons are going to be dropping gear, and that gear is going to correlate with the level of your keystone. Simply put, this means that the difficulty of dungeon content can extend far, far beyond where it currently does. Ian mentioned how this is essentially something that could replace raid gameplay for people if they were to choose that. I actually think that's great. Not everyone likes the larger scale of raids, and dungeons have really solid mechanics to back them up. I can see a lot of people thinking, oh, challenge modes, and then not really being interested in this, but these aren't really like challenge modes in a traditional sense. It seems like this is, in a way, a version of Mythic that just scales up and up and up and up and up as far as you can push it. Ian said that initially, these are going to be slightly harder than heroic dungeons, so you can definitely see that they're meant to be something that everybody can get into reasonably. And overall, I'm actually very happy and pleased with this system. The parallels between this and Diablo 3's Rift system are very clear, but it seems as if Blizzard are more going for the idea of the content being harder rather than a strict time trial element. If it turns out that way, then I think that's fantastic. I didn't like how in traditional challenge modes, the content itself was easy, it was just about blasting through it as fast as possible. I am less interested in the time trial element, and far more interested in the actual mechanics and numbers being really difficult. It seems like that's what they're going with this system. Of course, a system like this means the dungeons are going to matter more and be more replayable. Both of these, I think, are really good things that are going to make adding additional dungeons into the expansion far more worthwhile. I guess the less positive way to look at that is that this is a systems-based approach that squeezes more content out of what they have, and they could just use that as an excuse not to add content. As far as I'm concerned, as long as they support this with new dungeon content, I think the former will be true, and this overall will be a very good addition to the game. Next up, a quick overview of the dungeons and raids. So the Emerald Dream is the first raid consisting of 7 bosses. These include a dragon boss, a nightmare corrupted Cenarius, and Xavius. The visuals look like quite a departure from what we have come to expect with Warlords. This is also going to launch a few weeks after the expansion, similar to how Highmaul was done. The final raid is the 10-boss-long Suramar Palace. Gul'dan is actually the final boss, but most of the foes are Nightfallen, who are a group of night elves that, in terms of evolution, are very much diverged from what we see around the place normally. Their design actually looks really, really cool. Almost science fiction-y in some ways. I think it's very, very pleasing. Ian was also very quick to point out that this is not a demon-filled raid like Hellfire. Next up, dungeons. So there are going to be 10 dungeons in Legion, that is actually one more than what they told us at Gamescom. While leveling, we will have access to the Eye of Ashara, Neltharian's Lair, the Halls of Valor, the Violet Hold, and Dark Heart Thicket. At max level, we're going to have the Vault of Wardens, Blackrook Hold, Helheim, Suramar Nobles District, and Suramar Catacombs. The leveling dungeons can be done in any order, just like the game's actual leveling zones, which all kind of makes sense, and Ian went into a little bit more detail about a few dungeons. In the Halls of Valor, we're going to face off against the Vrykul God King in order to gain the favour of Odin, spelled with a Y, of course. I wasn't really aware that the Norse pantheon were big into their trademarks and their copyrights, but anyway, the next thing that he talked about was Helheim. This is a ghost ship that carries away the souls of the damned. Seems kind of nice. We're going to be heading in there to secure some very important cargo, and the dungeon itself is going to be similar to Grimrail Depot in that you're on a kind of moving vehicle. From what I've seen of the footage they've released anyway, it looks very, very nice. Blackrook Hold is an ancient elven stronghold, and we go in there while chasing down Illidan, and we'll be facing off with his mentor. And finally, Darkheart Thicket is a leveling dungeon at the end of the Val'sharah storyline. The nightmare basically is spilling out of here, so we need to jump in and save an ally of sorts. We don't really know crazy amounts of detail for these, just a little bit of flavor. And that's pretty much it for the dungeon and raid stuff. Most of this panel wasn't covering the new systems, it was giving us just an idea of what the actual content was, so we're going to find out more about systems probably come tomorrow. Anyway, that is pretty much it for the video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more BlizzCon goodness throughout the weekend and of course into the future. Hit me up on Twitter if you want to chat about this stuff more. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.